This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Released on Tuesday, April 12th, 2016.
This Agile Life, episode 108.
The empathy toy.
The software industry transforms more and more every day. Agile methods are quickly replacing traditional ones. The question is, are you agile enough? This podcast is devoted to agile and lean software development. Time to welcome your agile coaches on This Agile Life.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Sextro. Joining me on this episode of This Agile Life, we have Lee McCauley.
Hey, John, how's it going?
It's going really good, Lee. How's it going for you?
I am going well. I'm having fun learning Scala at the moment, which is probably about 2 years behind where I should have, but, you know, it's cool.
Cool. Also joining us this episode, back from a period of time away from the show because he's so busy, Jason Tice.
Hey, John, how are we doing? It's great to be here, and it's good to hear. It was great to hear a few episodes come out while I was away. So, and I look forward to our conversation this evening.
Indeed, and I look forward to it as well. And tonight we're going to be talking about an Agile Technical Conference. What is, Jason, an Agile Technical Conference?
Well, so the Agile Technical Conference, that was something that was just held down in Raleigh, North Carolina in April 2016. And it was the first conference that the Agile Alliance has sponsored that was really focused on technical practices. So they actually made a heat map, which we'll put a link to this. We'll put a link to the conference website in the show notes, because that was kind of how they defined the program, where things like Scrum and like the Scaled Agile framework or how to scale Agile were explicitly not allowed on the program. So instead, they focused on things like continuous integration, refactoring, how to write clean code, mob programming, things like that. Again, really hands-on keyboard activities, really focusing on the technical aspects of really what it takes for an Agile team to be successful.
Sounds like you're talking about really engineering practices.
Yeah, I mean, put it this way, one of the things where I will just share, I was amazed, and this is something that definitely, it got some tweet traction at the conference, was watching Jim Shore test drive JavaScript and CSS development using test-driven JavaScript in 6 different browsers at the same time.
That sounds insane to me.
Well, it is insane, but it just goes to show that if you're building a web app, the complexity of how you have to go about supporting CSS to make sure it renders effectively in all the browsers. And to Jim's credit, he is doing that with a TDD methodology he has developed to develop your CSS in a test-driven manner. Something that, to his credit, something that I know I've talked about with Craig is, guess what? Jim, or actually I believe he goes by James, he was struggling with this in real life, and so he took it upon himself to say, you know what? I'm going to build my own testing framework for this so I can effectively write tests for CSS in 6 different browsers at the same time. So it goes back to saying that if you want to solve a problem using a framework, yes, there may be some upfront investment to build that framework, but I mean, it was just amazing to see how he did that, and it was an awesome session to watch. And I was like, wow. And it really, again, lead to your point about learning Scala. It's like I know a little bit about CSS, but I've really never focused on that because the firm I work for, we have front-end engineers that typically sit with our dev teams, and they take on a lot of the CSS and front-end work on behalf of the team. And so I've never had to jump in there before, so it was interesting to see someone do that at that level of skill.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, I've had to deal with multiple browsers and how it renders and how JavaScript works and the whole bit, all in you tend to go with one browser while you're developing, and then you will have to jump over to another browser at some midpoint during the development process. When you think it's working on one, then you jump in and fix it on another, and that's hellacious. So I would love to see him see that demonstration.
Well, the other thing too is it gets to kind of what I would say another theme of the conference is really talking about, and it's a theme that I liked hearing a lot about, was talking about governance. And, the whole idea of like, if you're developing an API, you've got to assume that people are going to take your API and use it to do all kinds of stuff that you have no idea with. And really this idea that once you push a new API out there, you deploy it once and you just let it run forever. Like you don't ever say you're going to end of life it and force your users to upgrade. The same thing goes for browsers. I mean, we have evolved, especially if you're building really anything that's consumer facing or public facing. But I'm even going to say for internal apps, we have moved beyond the idea of saying this app was designed to work in Firefox version X. You don't do that anymore. You actually should say, no, I'm going to support all the modern web browsers. And by that nature, guess what? All the modern web browsers don't work exactly the same. So if you want to do some really cutting edge stuff, you're going to have to force yourself to do a little bit of extra work there to provide a good user experience across all those platforms.
So Jason, is this Agile Technical Conference, is this the first time this is being held, this conference?
Yeah, it was the first time, and I think I wasn't on the committee. I got invited to do a little activity, kind of I want to say halfway through the planning process, which we can talk more about that later. But the goal here was to try to recreate an experience that the Agile Alliance had gotten some data that people had stopped going to the large Agile conference because it didn't have a lot of technical content. Now, I think that's an excellent observation, and I'm glad to see somebody act on this information, because it has been seeming the past few years conferences are really trending. The Agile conferences are really trending more and more towards the Agile coach, towards the Scrum Master, towards the people, the non-technical disciplines within an Agile team. And I'm glad to see us refocusing around some of these technical and engineering practices, because those are so very important, and they've been overlooked, I think. Well, but see, here's what I'm going to say. Having been involved with the Big Agile Conference for a couple of years now, we have a technical program, which it's not like we don't have a technical program and technical tracks at the Big Agile Conference. It's just for whatever reason, a lot of people, even people that submitted content to that, people said I guess some of the technologists said they didn't want to go to a conference with a bunch of non-technical people running around. The challenge I have with that is that creating too much friction on a team when there's the technical people and then there's the people that are less, or maybe they're not technical at all. The fact that we have to have two separate conferences for that, is that a symptom of a larger problem?
Let me ask you a question that I think will piss off some people, because, hey, that's what podcasts are for.
Exactly.
Anyway, so if you've got a coach that's guiding a technical team, shouldn't they at least have gotten a background in the technical areas to be able to coach them appropriately?
I think in a perfect world, Lee, I would say yes. That's the desired state.
Hell yes. I say hell yes.
You see a lot of, but do you see a lot of coaches out there that are not, have never been technical? They've just learned, they've gone to the Scrum classes, or they've gone to some other Agile group and they've got their certification and they're trying to make money off of it, but they've never actually been on a team and to do technical work.
Yeah, but to be fair, I think, and I know I'm kind of the outcast here because, admittedly, I do more work on the business side in my current focus. So it was it was interesting for me to wind up at the technical conference myself. But let's be honest, Tice. You can actually hang with the technical people. I've seen. Yes, I know. I did mob program, and your brain switches. And you're fine. Yeah, I did mob program with Llewellyn Falco and Arlo Belsheet a bunch. So yes, and I was saying I need to tell Amos. Amos would be proud of me. I wrote Java code at the technical conference. Anyways, so here's where I was going to say, Lee, is one of the things. The second keynote at the conference was Bob Martin, and Bob Martin did his presentation on the future of programming, and I refer to it as that because I believe he's doing that at several conferences this year. I believe he's actually doing it at Agile Indy, which is actually going to be it's also April 2016. It's actually tomorrow, the day after we're recording this. But his remarks, I believe, will be somewhat similar. One of the things he talks about is how, as software professionals, we need more rigor and discipline. And in particular, really back, when software got started, he talks about how programmers were taken from other fields where many times they had learned elements of rigor and discipline from their work as mathematicians or physicists or engineers before they became programmers. So back then, you could give people a problem. You could say, hey, can you get this done in 3 months? And they could say, well, we'll try, and we will track to a deadline. And one of the things Bob Martin proposed is that early developers had that discipline. As the software profession has grown, we've lost some of that discipline because people come in, they haven't had another job. They don't know what a deadline is. And then consequently, they can't make a deadline that allows us to run a business. So where I'm going, long answer to your question, Lee, is that someone on the team needs to provide that viewpoint. If that happens to be a scrum master who is not technical, but understands how to work with the team to help them make effective deadlines that they can all work to and that don't imprison the team, somebody needs to do that. Ideally, the whole team learns to do that together, but maybe it takes a non-technical scrum master or a coach to inject that into the environment so they learn that.
That sounds like heresy to me.
Really?
Why don't we just go and go back to project managers or something, and Gantt charts and deadlines and that's what Gantt charts and project managers are really good at doing, is imposing bullshit deadlines and then trying to drive people towards those.
Well, but here's the thing. I think it comes down to I'll share where I think I see a lot of the non-technical coaches and scrum masters going wrong, and that is that they don't provide autonomy and really respect to the team to do the work they need to do. So it's almost like, if you're starting out on a project, maybe you set a deadline of a month to try to get something done. But if you're a week in and you're like, oh my goodness, we just started and we found this whole API that we thought we could just consume, and you know what? It turns out the API only provides half of the functionality that we thought it did. So we're going to have to figure out how to get the other data because the API is incomplete, and that changes our deadline. A good scrum master or project manager will say, oh my goodness, that's a problem. I understand it. I support you. I trust you. Let's figure out what a compromise is together, and then let's present the plan back to the business. I see a lot of more novice scrum masters. They'll say, no. We made a commitment to the business. Our scope is fixed for the next month. We have to hit it. And that's if that's what's going on, that's where the non-technical coach or scrum master is not respecting the technical viewpoint that they don't have themselves, but instead needs to be represented on the team. Does that make sense?
Lee, is that what you were driving at with your comments?
Well, kind of. I think that I don't want to paint anybody with a broad stroke here and say that, if you never have technical experience, then you can't possibly help the team. Of course not. That's not where I was going with it. But I think you're more likely to do what Jason was talking about, which is not trust the team or misrepresent the team, not doing it maliciously or anything like that, but just mistakenly. And if you don't have the technical background on it, and that's really my only worry, is that you're more likely to do the things that really mess up the team if you don't have the background.
Yeah, well, the other one I'll just share that was probably one of my favorite sessions I had a chance to sit in was, and this is one that is out there on YouTube, because I spoke to Fred George, who did his session on what he calls programmer anarchy. And I believe there's a couple of YouTube videos of it out there from him at other conferences. He actually shared it's not one of his newer talks, but the program for the Agile technical conference was done by invitation this year. So I believe he was invited to share that talk specifically because he goes on. He's very open to say that, all the roles that Scrum says, you don't need them. And basically he tells the story that in all the companies he supported, they have evolved to really just having business people and programmers. And he actually had some great theories to say that, and he was formerly with ThoughtWorks, and so he had a great story about how I believe it was Martin Fowler wanted to have the iteration manager, which is a ThoughtWorks role, and how he said that was the dumbest thing ever. So that was hilarious to hear that story from his perspective. But he goes on to say that many of the Agile practices are actually symptomatic of really bloating the Agile community. And if we simply focus on writing good code and doing something to test it so we can release it quickly, that, you know what, a lot of the need to have all these other Agile practices goes away. And his presentation had where he would light up this big list of Agile practices and he would X them all out because he said, because we focused on empowering people, letting people work together to solve problems, and really from the business side, letting the business give the teams autonomy to work and solve the problems the best way possible, and trusting them if they needed a little more time. They were able to get rid of all these things that, many of us really focus on as coaches, especially from a non-technical perspective.
That's fair. Jason, what were the hot topics at this conference? What are the people with the technical backgrounds, technical disciplines, what were they hungry for in this conference? What did they want to attend? What were the best attended sessions?
Well, I think from a technical perspective, there was a lot of focus on really the technical side of what DevOps is. So there were quite a few sessions where people talked about how do you provision standard environments using some element of a scripting language. So things or a product. I mean, some people showed I know there was a Cloud Foundry session that they showed off how to do, platform-based deployments in the Cloud Foundry and really how to develop 12-factor apps. But then also there were other, abilities to show outside of a specific platform tool like Cloud Foundry or Azure. How could you use a scripting language? And there's a few of those out there that allow you to write a platform agnostic script that can work with any of the commodity cloud providers. So there was a big emphasis on that. Interesting thing I thought happened. This is a personal statement I'm going to throw out there. I brought this up at a few of the lean coffees. Was Lori Williams was there, and she gave a presentation that was very well attended. That was, what have we learned in the first 20 years of doing pair programming? And the profound statement I think she said, which I thought was interesting, and you guys will find this interesting, is she said that when she went to prepare for the talk, one of the things that she looked back on was her book. And she said that based upon what she wrote in her book, I believe nearly 20 years ago, there isn't a need to write a second edition. Meaning that the guidance she provides in her book, she believes is still valid. My question is, what do you guys think about that?
What is it that she provides? I haven't read the book.
So she writes, her book is basically, it's a good step-by-step guide. And it was funny, I've read it about 5 years ago. I haven't read it recently. So, but it talks about the science, kind of the human factors. And then also it really explains her recommendations, and it has some good pairing techniques, like how to introduce pairing to your team and how to get started in a pretty easy to consume manner. So none of that crazy 1 hour pair switch stuff that Amos talks about. But you get what I'm saying.
Let me ask you this question, and Lee, I'd also
if not, I have a hypothesis too that I'll share, but I'm curious what you guys think first.
So I'm going to ask this question. I'd also be interested as to what Lee thinks about the assertion that after 20 years or however long this book has been out, that there's no need for a revision to the book. And my question to you guys then is, why aren't we doing this in 100% of all Agile projects around the globe?
So first off, I'll have to echo what you said, John, which is I haven't read the book. Unlike Jason, who reads everything.
Or at least the first 2 pages, so he can say he read some of the book. Sorry, Jason.
Lori, I read your book.
So I don't really know what all she advises there. And so I think the broader question that I think you're trying to get at, though, is why haven't we learned anything new about pair programming, at least, or how was it that she was so spot on the first time? Am I getting that right?
I think so, but a little bit more. My real point is if it's so perfect, if incarnation 1 was so perfect of the book, and assuming that the masses have read and consumed this book, why isn't it 100% or 80% employed across Agile projects? I think it's probably 20% employed across Agile projects. If it's so perfect, if her advice is so perfect, and I'm not taking a shot at her, and I really just want to get at a deeper issue as to why aren't more teams doing pair programming?
Well, and that's what I was going to say, John, is I think my hypothesis is, I think it's interesting that we could say we've been doing pair programming for, actually, I think it was 10 years. I have to look at the subject of our talk. But we've been doing pair programming for a period of time. And I think it just goes to show that we really haven't studied it. Like, people, I think, say, oh, I'll try it for a week. Oh, we didn't like it. It was weird. I felt, one of the things she talked about is how, it really is like you feel truly exposed because, wow, dude, I had no idea how to refactor that method, and Lee just showed up and did it in 2 minutes. Boom. Or, hey, I had no idea how to write a test like that, and John popped the test out, boom, like that. And that makes you feel very vulnerable.
So I hear you saying all of the reasons why I should pair, because I learn things, because I discover new things, because I become a better programmer, and I'm forced to deal with some of my vulnerabilities, and I'm much more productive. And I think that people that don't understand productivity with pair programming are the non-technical people that sit back and just think that it's two people doing the job of one person.
So there's two important things you just said there. One, at the very end, I want to point out, because it goes back to one of our big things that we harp on all the time, which is people are not resources, and you can't just count up the people or the amount of hours that people are spending on something and equate that to productivity. There's a lot more to it than that. The other thing is that you pointed out is that it's all about your attitude towards it, right? So I find that in places that aren't doing pair programming, those are also the places that don't actually, that the people there are not rewarded as a team. They're rewarded as individuals. They're same thing with punishment and raises and promotions. It's all a competitive atmosphere where if to foster an atmosphere where and a culture where pair programming is used all the time and where people are fine with it, you have to be rewarding the team for accomplishments, and where nobody, even if they screw up, it's still the team that screws up, and nobody looks at that other member and gets mad at them. They go, okay, well, we need to do better next time, and this is how we messed up, right? And so, yes, you're put on the spot and you are vulnerable, but you're only vulnerable because the entire team is vulnerable. So you're not alone. And that's the difference, I think, between teams or places where pair programming is used a lot and pair programming is not used. It's all about how the company rewards or discourages it.
Yeah, and Lee, I think that's guidance that is mentioned in Lori's book, but I think that falls when I hear a lot of people talk about pair programming, I hear them emphasize all of the team level aspects, which are very beneficial to the team. And the story I don't hear enough of is you do need to ensure that this practice is introduced in accordance with an organization structure and an organizational culture for learning that supports it. And if your organizational culture is not set up that way because of performance reviews or more managerial structures or whatever, HR mandated feedback loops that go against the grain of a self-organizing team, it is not going to work. And I think the interesting thing is that we haven't studied pair programming enough at that level to where you could go back and write a second edition of Lori's book, or someone could publish a research paper to say that, well, here's where we've studied where pair programming has been effective, and here's where we've studied it and it hasn't been effective, and here are the root causes that are supported by data as to why. And I think many of what you're saying, Lee, as hypotheses would be revealed. I mean, and the three of us have all done work out as part of Agile Transformation, where we have been asked to help introduce pairing in multiple environments where we went against the grain of the organizational structure. So I just think that this goes to many of the themes I've heard in the last few years at conferences, where some of these, there is an opportunity to really take a little bit more of a research method to some of the practices we're exploring, and really learn more by conducting experiments where maybe our goal is not for the experiment to succeed, which is what we always want to happen, but maybe the goal of the experiment is for it to fail, because if it fails, we get an experience of, we know it doesn't work because of this factor. So rather than knowing why it does work, we have data to support the null hypothesis. And I think that we're just getting started. We simply haven't done all this research. Does that make sense?
So who do you think would be doing this research? I mean, because in a lot of cases, we would look to universities to do research, right? And I'm not sure the universities are really in a position to do this kind of research for the most part. And I know from past experience that they have no idea what true Agile and, to be honest, true software development is really like in the real world. So I'm not sure that I would trust them.
Well, you're right. And that was actually something that came up after Bob Martin's keynote, was they actually had a conversation. Someone asked a question about why would the Agile Alliance ever get more involved in providing a suggestion as to what should be in computer science curriculums? And this was based upon some of Bob Martin's comments that really the computer science programs don't do the right thing in terms of preparing professionals to go into the software workforce. And more so than in other academic fields, I mean, Lee, you can comment on this from your background, is that there is a perception that once you go into the professional field as a computer science person, you do not go back to academia because you become corrupt. And unlike other fields where they want you to go out, work in industry, and then come back and be on faculty, like especially like a business school, or like when I went to business school, like everyone had worked somewhere and had come back, and that was like their retirement job. That is not how CS works. But because of that, some of the stuff they're teaching in CS curriculums doesn't prepare people for what they need to do on day one of their real life job, which is just dumb. What do you think about that, Lee?
Here was my experience with it, at least at the university I was at. So the beginning level computer science classes were often taught by assistant professors. These were essentially people that had not yet gotten tenure. They were full professors from that perspective. They weren't like adjuncts or visiting professors or anything like that, but they were just teaching 101 sort of classes, right? And then there was this medium level where you actually got deep into a language, or it was a very specific application of a language in a particular area. And those might actually be taught by adjunct faculty, often from local businesses. I was in Memphis, so we actually had people from FedEx, for example, who taught some of our classes. And we loved those people, but those people would never come back and want to be a professor full time because they don't make enough. And professors have to go out and beg for money constantly, and that's not what those people are in for. They want to do technical stuff. So we love to have faculty that had actually been in business, but that doesn't mean we could get them.
Yeah. Well, Puzzle, one other thing, and we kind of pivoted the conversation. My apologies. We kind of, John, do you want to say anything else about pairing, or do you want to go on to something else?
I would like to find out a little bit more about DevOps from you, Jason. But before we go into that and find out what was the hot topics of conversation revolving around DevOps, I would like to take a moment to do a listener call out. And if you guys have been listening to the show recently, you know that each episode now we're taking a moment to thank one of our community members, and I'm going to do that right now. So if you've listened to more than a few of our more than 100 episodes, you know that we don't often read commercials on the show. And this episode's no different, but I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our supporters that have joined us on our Slack channel. Jason and Lee are out there every day responding to people, having conversations with people, talking about things like pair programming and DevOps. And on our Slack channel, we love to talk about these things and more with our supporters. I also want to personally thank one of those supporters, Mr. Urban Hafner. Urban started supporting the show back in September 2015. Urban, thank you for your support. We feel honored that you listen to the show. If you want to join Urban and the rest of the folks in our Slack channel, go to thisagilelife.com/community. And since we started doing this, guys, we've had a number of new people sign up, and it's going to be very challenging for us to keep in front of the power curve in terms of mentioning a person every episode. I might have to kick it up a notch and start doing maybe 2 or 3 people per episode. So that's our call to action. Go out there to thisagilelife.com/community and check that out. We'd love to have you in our Slack channel. Jason, I would like to get back to the topic of DevOps, because that seems in the past 2 or 3 years to be the flavor of the month in the technical ranks of all of the Agile projects, as everybody wants to talk about DevOps and the Phoenix Project book and everything that goes along with that. So why do you think that DevOps was such a hot topic at this technical conference?
I just think that that's where there's been, to link back to one of the things I was going to say about pairing. One of the interesting theses that Bob Martin shared in his keynote was that he did this timeline about evolution of stuff, and really saying that all of the technical things that we use in our craft, like functional programming, object-oriented design, and like even basic language syntax that was created with like Fortran. That all dates back to really the late 60s and 1970s. And since then, there has been very little innovation in the software space. Would you guys agree? I mean, what is some new software thing or way to write code that has evolved since then?
I don't know. I think
there is none.
I think that's fair. I can't think of anything that's been earth-shattering or groundbreaking. Yeah.
Well, and again, just to level set for those that weren't there and that haven't heard this Future of Programming keynote, he level set that against what has occurred that he claimed, and I would agree myself, is highly innovative in the hardware space, where even though we've outlived Moore's law for the purpose of the CPU speed, think about your iPhone, where it has over 1 trillion transistors in it, and yet it's small enough to hold in the palm of your hands, has 1 trillion transistors, and runs off a battery for 10 hours a day doing kind of whatever you want to do to it. So, and probably has a lot of storage in it. Who knows? I mean, at least, I don't know. When will an iPhone have 1 terabyte in it? Probably sometime in the next year, I'm going to guess. So, that's pretty innovative if you figure that really, the last 40 years we were using vacuum tubes, and now we have 1 trillion transistors in an iPhone that runs on a battery for 10 hours, and that's pretty phenomenal. Would you agree? So I think, to get back to your question about DevOps, I think DevOps is one of those technical areas which does impact how you write code, where we have seen phenomenal innovation. And I think what it is it's a lot of this hardware-based innovation, which is now having a softer flavor to it. And since it has a softer flavor to it, it's available to be consumed by software developers. Make sense?
What do you mean by there's a softer flavor to it, Jason?
Okay, so I go back to a real-life episode of This Agile Life. I don't know the number, but it was the one when, John, you and Craig and Amos talked about building Agile infrastructure in your data center. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
And you had this crazy story about thin vertical slice where you were going to put one rack in and one blade in, and you were going to power the one rack and the one blade. And okay, I agreed that would work, but if you've ever done a data center build-out, that's not typically how it goes down. You do all the racking, all the power, all the cooling, then you start loading blades in because it makes sense for it to work in batches. What I think where DevOps comes into this is now you, John, as a dev, you can build a runtime environment, just like you were trying to talk through on that episode, using code. So since you manage your infrastructure and code, hey, spin up a little sandbox for me because this app that I'm deploying, I think is small. So I can basically request that environment be provisioned. It's provisioned to a I'm just going to call it a cloud environment. We can talk if you want to talk about the details of that, but it's provisioned to a cloud. I pay for what I use, and I can start to kick the tires on it. And right off the back, if I find out that when I start to run a load test, it doesn't work, I can do something about it, and I can make those changes in software, and that's very accessible to you as a developer. Does it make sense?
It's the commoditization of computing resources to the ultimate degree where you don't care about where anything lives. You just you have the ability to spin up these whatever these cloud computing resources are, probably at the most granular level being like virtual machines and that sort of thing. And you don't have to worry about so much of the hardware anymore. It's just infinitely scalable out there. Nobody worries about stacking, racking, plugging things in, running cables and whatnot.
Well, put it this way. Infrastructure engineers do somewhere. Somebody somewhere's got to build the data center that runs the cloud.
Yeah, but we don't have to worry about those concerns anymore.
Yeah, but what it should be, and again, if you're listening to us, the expectation that you should be looking for in your organization, or you should ask for, is if you have to go fill out a ticket, like so you suppose you're going through this scenario where your build box gets slow, right? Has anyone ever been where your build box got slow? You are trying to practice the sacred XP practice of the 10-minute build. So if the build ever goes, if the build ever takes longer than 10 minutes, make it go faster so you get fast feedback. So an example of why DevOps is popular. If you're in an organization where you have to go fill out a help desk ticket and ask a system administrator to build you a new box or change the configuration of your environment on your behalf, you need to demand better. And what you should demand is say, hey, give me an API that as a developer I can code to, and I could say, hey, I want to change the configuration of my build environment via the API. So instead of one core, it has 2 cores, or however your infrastructure has been provisioned. And you should be, as a developer, John, you should be able to do that in a self-service manner. If I'm the ops guy, a couple things. Number one, you should have a subset of managed environments and configurations. So we don't want it to get out of control because then everyone's unique. But at least with this, if I'm going through an API, you know what? All of those APIs are audited or they're auditable. So if I've done that and I've used scripts that I can put into a repo to interact with an API, guess what? I can audit that, and I don't have snowflakes because I can reproduce in accordance with the API my infrastructure. So these are the things that as a developer, you should be looking for in your environment. And really, again, on the ops side, that's what the whole DevOps convergence is driving. Does that make sense?
Sure. And this sounds like, to me, this is only one leg of maybe a multi-legged approach to or definition of what DevOps is. I mean, this is kind of the sexy side from the developer's perspective with the concept of DevOps. What developers have wanted forever is to control their own destiny with where their stuff runs, to control their own destiny with deployments, provisioning, standing up new environments, etc. And now we finally have that, and that's cool. That's sexy to developers. But what about the other aspects of DevOps that I think are getting ignored in these conversations, particularly around sustainability of the environments, as well as the kind of dirty little stepchild of all of this, which is production support, production operations, and dealing with failures, dealing with bugs that occur, and then responding to those issues that had previously maybe been farmed out to some sort of support organization.
Well, so a couple things about that. Like for your issue about infrastructure, it was said in multiple sessions, DevOps best practice. You want to call it this? We could sure make some best practices, John. When you deploy to new infrastructure every time. So there's no idea of, hey, let's take the old application file off the application server and put a new one out there. No, you constitute a new environment from the baseline up. You put your new content on it, and what you let you do is you could then do a rollover deployment. So you could bring the new environment online. You could do some selective testing if desired, and then if it works, cut over to it, and then simply turn the old one off and keep it there as an archive. If you need to roll back, simply turn it back on. But that's a standard, and I'm just starting to see teams adopt that. Does that address your question about infrastructure?
Yes.
So the other thing about support is it's interesting because I think that really does go back to some of the other technical practices that we haven't talked about. Although I remember I made the mention about James Shore doing his TDD for CSS, but you've got to invest in automation. So because you need to assume that you want to deploy the software as fast as possible. Manual testing at any level of the test pyramid is not sustainable if you want to allow for rapid deployments. So the way you solve the quality problem and the bug problem, John, is you have automated tests and you do TDD.
Do you see teams taking ownership of their quality problems? I've noticed a trend, and this trend has been there for many years. Anytime there's a segregation of responsibilities and duties, for instance, if I have a quality assurance person on the team or a group that we interface with, all of a sudden quality goes down on the team because the job of quality has been transitioned, at least in theory, from the development team to this quality assurance team. And the same thing goes for like production support, or what I will call like on-call support for a system. If there's a group that's responsible for that, the focus on sustainability, the focus on scalability, the focus on bug-free, high-quality code goes down, because all of a sudden it's no longer the developer's responsibility. It's some production support team's responsibility or quality assurance team's responsibility, and the development team, the development group, is not sharing the pain equally that is incurred by them producing bugs, low quality code, and pushing that out into the environment. And that's the particular aspect of DevOps that I see lacking in the conversations that are occurring in this space today.
So can I ask you a question, John?
Please.
In those environments, how frequently do you release?
Why is that important?
Because I think the key to this, and this was a theme I heard again in multiple sessions at the technical conference, was we say we can't have separated QA. You actually can have separate QA, but you've got to have a fast feedback loop. So I think where a separate QA branch can cause harm is when it becomes a follow-on phase of work that works at a large batch, because that's when you lose the fast feedback. And instead, if we say we're going to commit to saying we push stuff out the door, so we commit the code, we run our automated tests, and then before we go live, somebody in the QA department has to click through it at least once, and then they can click something, and it gets turned on for all the users. If we commit to doing that as fast as possible, meaning that the QA people will test it as soon as it's done, that can be successful. But the key thing there, John, is it's the fast feedback loop.
Okay, so I now understand why that's an important question, and I agree with you. What I have noticed, though, is that in these situations, the feedback loop is never fast. It's always extended, and that number of times that we are able to push the button for deployment, even if it's just to an intermediary location, is extended. We release less as a result of having these separations of concerns across quality assurance and production support.
I think there's also a bit of overhead that gets stuck into the process for each one of those layers. And by reducing the layers with kind of a DevOps kind of a structure, I think a lot of that goes away. And so that also increases the time, the cycle time.
The thing I've been trying to drive towards, Lee, in the name of DevOps, is to pull these responsibilities back, and even if it means that the development team takes more time to perform quality assurance within the space of their work cycle, what it does is it enables you at the end of that quality assurance that the development team has done to then push the button on that particular feature, minimal marketable feature, story, etc., and say, deploy that with confidence because that person has taken the time to do it, and that person or that pair is now responsible for the quality of that code, and that is directly linked back to them should there be a problem, and they will have to deal with it. And that's why I think that organizations that push to production many times a day or many times a week, such as the GitHubs of the world, etc., that they're able to do that because the individuals are accountable and responsible for the quality. It hasn't been pushed off to some other unit, some other group.
Well, or to be fair, John, because there are people who do push frequently that for whatever reason have separate QA or have secondary QA, like from a compliance standpoint. The key thing in all those environments is they have committed to saying we're going to release frequently. And so if you commit to that as an organization, it's going to force you to figure out how to lean out your process so it works. And
I don't think that DevOps necessarily means that you have to have a separate organization or separate group that's doing it. Why can't DevOps be done by the team that's also writing the software? I mean, to be honest, I think there are some worries with that too. But just because you say you're doing DevOps doesn't mean that you've got a separate unit doing it.
No, I think
you guys know what that.
I think by definition that is what DevOps means, is that we are bringing that all under one roof. It's the development group's responsibility to operationalize everything, right? So they're responsible for quality. They're responsible for quality assurance. They're responsible for dealing with scalability issues. They're responsible for dealing with quality issues that are now impacting users because we've pushed something out into the production space that's causing that problem. And that is the developers that feel that pain. And we all know that the more pain we feel individually, the more our natural reaction is to avoid that pain in the future by taking whatever steps are necessary. I only need to grab the hot pot on the stove one time for my monkey brain to realize, my lizard brain to realize not to grab hot pots on the stove.
So maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. I thought you were objecting to the DevOps thing because it was a separate unit. Did I miss that?
Yeah, maybe not, and maybe I misconveyed it. But what I was saying was that the hot, sexy side of DevOps in culture today revolves around the software, the soft, malleable nature of the infrastructure, and less on the accountability of high quality products.
Yeah, that's right, John. And also from an org perspective, there are elements of really the business side of a DevOps transformation that I think Lee is really we're all speaking to here, which is that if you're, why do we have offshore sustainment teams? Or outsource sustainment teams? Is because, we need our high rate developers to go out and build the next awesome product. So we're gonna outsource our sustainment because that couldn't be very important. So we'll hire a vendor at a lower rate. That's why that happens. And what we're saying, and if anyone's ever managed that doesn't go very well in many instances. It sometimes does go well, to be open out there. So I've seen it work successfully. But if you're going to really embrace the full DevOps triangle, you need to ensure that the developers that maybe move on to a new project, they do have some capacity available and they're able to pivot back to support their prior work if needed. And hopefully, since you've invested in test automation, automated deployments, managing your infrastructure as code, you're able to do that very quickly because it's like, hey, I could just spin up a new dev environment and I can test that little tweak real quickly. I don't have to, submit a ticket and wait 3 days for them to spin up an environment that I can actually test on. So you should be able to do that in an efficient manner. But the key thing is you do need to give the people autonomy to go back and do the support that we're talking about.
One of the reasons, Jason, why I was so excited about the Phoenix Project book, which you, thankfully, led me to at one point, was the fact that what that book really talked about was ownership of the project teams for all of these aspects of project delivery, infrastructure, the scripting of your deployment process, and then being responsible for production support, production operations, and high quality. Those were the things that got me excited about it, were those last three: being responsible for production support, production operations, and high quality. To me, that was the secret sauce of the Phoenix Project book.
And I think I think that's right, John. And the key thing about that, it goes full circle because, again, kind of almost to close this out, it goes back to that whole thing Bob Martin said about innovation. And this is where, as developers, we should all be very thankful for the innovation that has occurred in the virtualized infrastructure or the infrastructure as code space. Because, these days, guess what? If you got a prod problem, I know we'll get pushback, but this is, Lee, here's this one's for you, okay? How to get people riled up. If you've got a prod problem, you should be able to say, give me a clone of prod so I can go hack around and figure out what the problem is. And then I can actually develop a fix, test first in a clone of prod that then we can push to prod at zero risk. So yeah, I want you to clone all of prod and give it to me in a version that I can consume in my dev environment so I can have less risk when I do that.
There's some guy with suspenders that just spit on his screen. Listen to this.
Well, and to be fair, that's a very, again, if you're a big enterprise out there, we know we got lots of big enterprises in the world. That's hard because you got some stuff in your data center that probably you just can't virtualize and throw it on the cloud. But the newer folks, the Twitters and GitHubs where they have a fully virtualized infrastructure, they can. So long term, we should all be working to say, if we truly have to do prod support, a developer should be able to say, give me a hot clone of prod that I can work in and truly do a test-first approach to fixing a critical support issue. And John, that gets us to where everyone's involved. And as a developer, you are empowered to go and do support the right way.
I agree, Jason, and I think that does bring us full circle. And unfortunately, we're out of time for this episode to extend this conversation any further. We'll have to cut this off and maybe put some of these other Agile technical conference topics that came up onto our backlog, and we can pull from in a future episode.
I was adding a list, so the rundown of stuff that you missed that John's cutting us off. So we are going to do a 3-hour Agile for Humans session tonight, apparently. We're going to do a short This Agile Life session, but things like no bugs. So Arlo Belshi did give some great tips about how to significantly reduce your bug count. And by the way, you know what? It has nothing to do with testing in many instances. It has to do with white space and method names. And of course, Llewellyn was there, Woody was there. So we had some great mob programming sessions, both doing mobbing and Woody also talking about mobbing, including really just doing a Q&A about the mob that he ran at Hunter, which was the mob that got it all started. And the last thing that I just want to plug about the Agile Technical Conference was the lean coffees were amazing because of the people that were there, and people that I hope, if you're at the big Agile conference, like the Lisa Crispins and the Llewellyn Falcos and the Woody Zools and all of you guys, I hope you do show up to Lean Coffee at the Agile conference, because those conversations we had were just amazing at Lean Coffee each morning. So just really, again, a testament to the caliber of people on the program to present, but then also people that just chose to attend the conference to learn from those who were there.
This week's hottest picks.
Lee, what do you have for your picks this episode?
Well, I actually have been looking at a lot of new Android frameworks, and so I have a couple to suggest. One is Leak Canary. This is free leak detection tool for Android. Very cool. Automatically catches your leaks from activities. And what's really cool, I actually used Leak Canary to explain the no ops pattern to to people because Lead Canary does a great job of using the no ops pattern. Anyway, also IcePick, my second pick. IcePick is a library that does your basically whenever you rotate your screen in Android or you pause it, put something else up, it basically destroys the entire activity and brings it back up, and it has to save your state. You have to save everything and bring it back from nothing. And so IcePick is a nice little library that does that entire serialization for you in however deep and however complicated it needs to be. So that's a nice little library as well.
Great picks, Lee. Thanks. Jason, what do you have for your picks this episode?
Okay, since it's that time of year, I'm going to do some live event picks. So first and foremost, actually, a suggestion I received from someone was I made a live events page on my website, the Agile Factor. So if you're interested in seeing where I'll be out and about at conferences doing stuff, that is now out there. I made a list that I'm going to keep up to date through the rest of the year. And it currently has, I believe, 7 upcoming live events at it all over the country. So join me at one of them. The other one is this podcast is coming out in April 2016. If you do hear this in April 2016 and are interested, I am holding an open space in St. Louis, Missouri on Friday, April 22nd, 2016. It's in downtown St. Louis. We'll put the link to the website where you can register to join us. It's a little different format. We've actually got Thiaji, who's he's also helping to keynote the Agile Games Conference, but he said he would come to St. Louis a little bit before that and help us with some activities for training and facilitation. So you get a keynote, you get a workshop. I'm going to break out the empathy toy, so you get that. And then, of course, it's open space. So who knows who else is going to show up and share something. So it'll be a great time on Friday, April 22nd, 2016. Join us in St. Louis if you are interested and available. And John, I think you're going to close it out.
I am, but first, I think you better explain the empathy toy, because you have to remember that Amos also listens to this show, and he will somehow turn that into a dirty something or another.
We should do the empathy toy on the podcast. We actually could. I just need to distribute it to you guys. I can ship you one, John, or we'll ship Amos one. What the empathy toy is, it's at 21toys.com. It is a wooden puzzle that you typically solve with a blindfold on. And so you have to feel it and kind of figure out how to put it together. And I'll make this a bonus pick to go check out the video that's online for this.
It's still sounding dirty to me.
I agree. Yeah. This is getting worse every minute.
It involves a blindfold and a wooden puzzle and feeling how to put it together and guiding your partner to be successful. So you guys have dirty minds, is all I can say. So
that is true.
Anyways, come check it out at the St. Louis Agile Open Space, and you'll get to experience the empathy toy for yourself. So
for that reason alone, you should go to the St. Louis Agile Open Space. So I think you're going to have a massive crowd.
I'm not sure I want an open space for that. I think I need a private space.
Well, it was very safe. So, and I will share, we've done empathy toy with a whole bunch of people in St. Louis, including a bunch of executives recently. Actually, got executives from a few companies now that have done it. So I think we've done it with more executives than we've done it with teams. So it's interesting how we're rolling it out in the local market here. So
did you get video?
Yes, I have some videos that have shown up.
So you have a good way to blackmail them, right?
Yes, we'll make sure it shows material. I think, Lee, the next team you're on, I think we will have to show up at your team inception. I'll see if I can arrange for that. We'll get some This Agile Life video. But no kidding, we should actually do it on the podcast, because there is a communication game you could play with it, and it would just be fascinating to let people hear this, I think.
Yeah, puzzles make for great podcasting. I have found.
Well, no, what's funny is because it is a visual activity, truly there could be no cheating if we turn Skype off, because we can't see. So it truly, people would hear what happens, and much hilarity would follow probably.
All right. So as Jason said, I've got the last pick. I'll go ahead and close the show out with my pick. If you're listening to this, as Jason said, in April 2016, there's been a lot of, you will probably be aware that there's been a lot of activity from Amazon with their Echo hardware, as well as the Alexa software that goes along with it. And Amazon has released something called the Dot, as well as the Tap, and those are new hot products from Amazon that are out there in the space. And I'm proud to say that I'm part of a project where we've recently integrated our the Sensi Wi-Fi thermostat with the Amazon Echo, so you can say things to it like, Alexa, set my temperature to 72 degrees. And it's just really a cool thing. And I'm on this big Internet of Things kick now, and I'm like getting Wi-Fi garage door openers, and I'm really going over the top with it. But I just wanted to recommend the Sensi Wi-Fi thermostat from Emerson Electric here in St. Louis, Missouri. You can check them out at sensicomfort.com. Jason, you have a big grin on your face. What's wrong?
At the open space, we're going to have a hack mob, and we're going to hack into John's house and open his garage door opener and set his thermostat up to 1,000 degrees. We're going to show you all the risk you're incurring by perhaps adopting the Internet of Things too early.
Okay, bring it on.
Oh, yes.
All right, that's all we have for this episode of This Agile Life. Check us out at thisagilelife.com for our show notes and for these great picks and for all of our past episodes. Thanks for listening, and keep living this Agile life.
This Agile Life is brought to you by a community of Agile developers and coaches aspiring to spread the word about this groundbreaking approach to software development. Join us at thisagilelife.com/community.